So I was thinking back, and I realized that in every dating relationship, there's always a point at which the two of you sit down and pull out each other's old photo albums that your parents put together growing up. All the pictures of you as a child, and it's sort of an interesting moment because when I showed Jen my album, she got to see the story of my life from beginning to end and sort of the journey I've walked, and I got to see the same with her. And there's a lot of pictures in there. I was very nervous that I didn't want her to see. So for instance, you open up the first page and there's a picture of a newborn baby. Born on a Sunday, less than 5 pounds. Only time in my life that I was bald. Turn a few pages and I'm a toddler. And there are just way too many pictures when I don't actually have pants on. After I get older than that, I have a tendency to have poor choices in haircuts over the years. She gets to see all of those. For instance, when I was, in elementary school, I had a bowl cut, bright blonde, and a little rat tail in the back. And she got to see those pictures. When I got older, I continued to make bad haircut choices. I grew my hair almost down my neck and bright blonde, and I wore outfits of all khaki like the 90s would. And so it was strange to let her see your life growing up like that, and you're kind of nervous about it. The good thing is she also showed me her picture album. Now, my wife is helping out in nursery today, and I told her I wasn't going to talk about her. I changed my mind. No, I'm teasing, there's not much, but I got to look through her picture album and see back her life growing up in Florida. It looked very warm down there, and I think they had fun. I got to see pictures of her older sister back when they were girls, and they lived and played together all those years. I got to see pictures of her dad back when he still had hair, which was surprising to me. I saw a string of very bad Halloween costumes, and I got to see even pictures of her high school prom. And it was funny, after going through these albums, as our relationship went along and we got engaged, we started preparing for the wedding, we started pulling out certain pictures. And we put on the tables, we had these jars. And in the jars, we put in a picture of me and a picture of her. We tried to do a parallel, like about the same age, our lives growing up, sort of my journey and her journey side by side. In that moment of the wedding, our journeys come together. And the picture album just helps tell that story. Our story, I suppose. And I was thinking about that because as we go through the story, we have now gone 30 weeks. We have one left. Do you believe that? One next week. We've come so far. And as we've gone through the story, we have heard over and over again in a grand picture the story of what God is doing with humankind. And so God gets a man by the name of Abraham, and through him develops a nation, and through that nation births the Christ, and through Christ sought the whole world. And here at some point, the story of God, the story, has to become our story. God's story has to become my story. And all of a sudden, what God has been doing through history fits in, as I understand, what I am doing in my life. And the story becomes our story, and that changes everything. And you can take your life, and you can look back, and you can see the journey in which you traveled, and then share that story on top of this story we've been studying for 30 weeks. And in my mind, when I think about the significance of studying the story, the whole Bible, some people say the best part of studying the Bible is you learn the rules, what you can do and what you can't do. And yes, there are some rules in there that help us. But to me, the best part of it is now I know where I fit in to what God is doing on earth. That as I read from the beginning what God has been doing here, and all of a sudden here I am. And how am I going to continue that story? And it's not about the rules, but about the purpose. It's about what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to do, and why we're here. And when you can orient your life around the story of God worked into your story, then it begins to make sense. Then you have the peace and the joy and the determination to move on. Because all of those things, these story and our story, line up. And in my mind, that is the best reason to study the Bible in a big picture. And so, this week we talked about a man who perhaps advanced God's story better than anyone else other than Jesus. A man by the name of Paul. Excuse me. Paul was this evangelist, and he went around and he founded all these churches in different areas, mostly around the Mediterranean Sea and whatnot. And he founded all these churches. And he gets down toward the end of his life. And he speaks to a guy by the name of Timothy, who is his spiritual successor, his son in the faith. And he talks to Timothy in 2 letters, particularly in 2 Timothy chapter 4. He says these words. He says this about his story. He says, and Paul is in prison as he's writing this. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness. See, Paul walked the path of his journey, and it led him to some very dangerous places. If you read in the story this week, they got through the latter part of the book of Acts, and it focuses mostly on Paul. And remember, Paul decides he needs to go back to the city of Jerusalem. And along the way, a prophet stops him. Do you remember that? Pulls out a belt, ties him up, and tells him it's not going to go well in Jerusalem. Now, what does Paul do? He goes anyway. He says, I don't care, this is where God has called me, and he's going to Jerusalem. Of course, he gets to Jerusalem, what they said happens. He's arrested. He's put on trial before a couple of different kings, moved back and forth between different places. And finally, in sort of almost a desperation moment, he appeals to Caesar. And this launches a journey in which he is on his way to Rome. And for several chapters, the book of Acts becomes almost this boat adventure. He's going along, landing in different places. There's a shipwreck. There's a big storm. They land on an island. They survive. They meet some other people. There's miracles and healings. Paul gets bit by a viper and survives. He heals people. The gospel is preached. And finally, by the end of it, he ends up in Rome. And of course, he's in prison. And it's this journey of his life, and it's been hard and difficult things happening to him. It's his life path, and he's telling his story and everything he's gone through. So if you can move on to 2 Corinthians. Paul in 2 Corinthians goes even farther in describing the things that he's been through. He's dealing with some people who've been criticizing him. And because of this, he feels he needs to defend the work he's put into the gospel. And he says he shouldn't brag. He says he shouldn't be a fool and talk in worldly terms. But if you're going to test my credentials, well, let me tell you what they are. And listen to this list. I have worked much harder, been in prison much more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in dangers in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. And go on the next one. I have labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. And besides everything else I face daily, the pressures of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? Paul is sharing his story, saying, these are the things I've gone through. This is the adventure of my life, and it's for the sake of the gospel. This is where I fit in, and this is what I'm trying to do. And Paul's been through so much. We've read these stories and these hardships, and all of these things that have happened. He said 3 shipwrecks. We only read about 1 in Acts. Can you imagine doing that 3 times? And interestingly, if you can flip over to Philippians chapter 4, Paul really kind of sums up all the hardship he's been through in a very amazing verse. I love this one. And I'm sure you've heard it before. He says, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. Okay, Paul has obviously been through a lot, but he's found the secret to being content. And that is knowing the story he's living and why he's doing it. He can share that story with Timothy and say, I have run the good race, I have fought the fight, and now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness. It is for Paul a difficult but joyful journey. Now, Paul wrote several of his letters from inside a prison cell, which is amazing in itself as he writes about joy and love and grace and mercy and living for God right there from a jail cell. As I was thinking about that, I was going back through my mind in school, things I'd learned about and read, and I thought of another man who wrote from jail. This is a man by the name of John Bunyan. Now, by the way, his name is not Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan was very, very different, okay? John Bunyan was a preacher from England who lived and preached in the 1600s. In fact, he was born in 1628. Now, during that time in England, there was this great battle. Okay, a little bit of history here. But, okay, so in that time, you had sort of a controversy between the Church of England and the Puritans. The Puritans wanted to get away from the Church of England and do things in a purer and different way. The Church of England wanted to do things the way the king told them to. And so the two didn't get along very well. It was a difficult situation. And there was some uproar politically and different things happened. But John Bunyan was preaching at the time, and it turns out that there happened to be a law at the time because of this controversy that no one could preach the gospel unless they had a license. How do you like that? Can't talk about Jesus unless the church says you're qualified to. Now, John Bunyan was not certified, didn't have a license by the Church of England. He was actually a Baptist. And he began preaching the gospel, and of course what happened is he ended up in prison. He was arrested and put in prison in the year 1660, and he stayed in there 12 years. 12 years in prison for preaching without a license. Now, John Bunyan, while he was in prison, began writing a very, very famous book. John Bunyan wrote a book called Pilgrim's Progress. He began writing it in prison, finished it later. It was eventually first published in 1678. Now, Pilgrim's Progress is more important in church history than you think. You probably heard the name, but you may not know that much about it. See, Pilgrim's Progress, after it was published in 1678, it got sent into colonial America in 1681, about 3 years afterwards. And so you're talking colonial America before the Revolutionary War, before even 1700. And this book is being passed around, Pilgrim's Progress. and it becomes very popular. It's being spread along all of colonial America, and even beyond that in England and around the world. This book, Pilgrim's Progress. In fact, at this day and age, you can say that Pilgrim's Progress has been translated into more languages around the world than any other book besides the Bible. It's been translated into dozens, if not hundreds, of languages. Pilgrim's Progress, there was a time in history in which, if you had two books on your shelf as a family back a long time ago, and those two books, you wanted to guess what they were, one of them was probably a Bible, and the other one was more likely than not Pilgrim's Progress. And so this book, Pilgrim's Progress, is what we call an allegory, which means that the main character stands in for every person. And it's not really a book or a novel, but it is something in which every person, every place, stands for something else in a spiritual sense. And so, for instance, let me tell you, the main character, his name is simply Christian. Simply Christian. And Christian is on a journey. He's leaving the city of destruction and going to find the celestial city. Now, this is a stand-in for every person, every Christian, going from the city of destruction to the celestial city, okay? We're standing in for every man. And along the way, he meets characters who have names like Worldly Wise Man, Goodwill, characters named Faithful and Hopeful. These are the people he runs into. When he was guided out of the city of destruction onto the celestial city, he was led by a man whose name was Evangelist. You get what's going on here? It's an allegory. It's being led along. It stands in for every man, our Christian journey. Along the way, he runs into very interesting places. He walks along the wall of salvation. He spends a few days in the town of Vanity. He stops by a doubting castle and avoids the mountains of error and caution. It's an allegory, and one of the most famous books ever written. And it stands in for all of us, the journey we're leading. We're all going from the city of destruction to the celestial city, hopefully in our lives, trying to pass along and find our salvation and our way with God. And it's this journey, it's the pilgrim's progress through life. And undoubtedly, for John Bunyan, it is partly autobiographical, his own life, his own journey in the spiritual world, and partly it's the story of everyone. And so it's a very simple concept and a beautiful story. There are a number of famous moments in the book. For instance, when you get to the point where Christian is walking along with a fellow traveler by the name of Faithful. Christian and Faithful walking along the road to salvation. They decide to stop in the town of Vanity. Vanity, of course, you know, is more or less pride, a little bit different take on it, but more or less pride. And they travel into Vanity, and before they get there, Evangelist comes back, who helped them to go, and he made a prediction that one of them would die in the town of Vanity. So Christian and Faithful end up in the town of Vanity, and there they resist the temptations to vanity, and they're mocked and made fun of for doing so. And eventually, so much so that they are imprisoned. By the way, John Bunyan was writing this from where? Prison. Okay. Explain that. John Bunyan is writing from prison. They're in prison. Faithful goes up and defends himself in court, and then is executed. The Christian survives and moves on past the town of Vanity and avoids that error on his way to the celestial city. So you get the idea. We'll go a little bit further. Later, he's joined by another peer along the fellow traveler by the name of Hopeful. And it's Christian and Hopeful walking along now. And they decide that they need to stop and spend the night in Doubting Castle. Doubting Castle. And there they end up in Doubting Castle. And Doubting Castle is owned by a terrible guy by the name of Giant Despair. You go to Doubting Castle, you've got to meet Giant Despair. And as they go there, Giant Despair, with the help of his wife, imprisons them, Christian and Hopeful, prison again and tortures them for their faith mercilessly with, I suppose, doubts. As they think and they struggle and they fight, and they're being tortured in Doubting Castle by giant despair. And somewhere along the way, they suddenly remember, wait a minute, I've got the key of promise. And it opens every door in this castle. And they're able to find their way out of Doubting Castle with the key of promise. You get the idea here. They're traveling along on their journey, and they're avoiding these errors, these mistakes, these difficulties. Torture and prison, doubting and vanity and all of these things. When they get down to the very end, they're standing outside the city gates of Celestial City. And they look over, and in order to get to the gate, they have to go over a river without a bridge. It's almost protected by a moat. And there's no instructions for how to get over the river. It's their last battle. Just a few steps to the Celestial City. Christian falls in. He gets scared and begins to drown. He can't make it. He's scared. He's getting close to drowning. Hopeful, his friend, reminds him of Christ's love. And he pulls out of the water his last difficulty and walks into the Celestial City where he's welcome. Now, I find that interesting because all the other things were named. Doubting Castle is kind of obvious. Town of Vanity, kind of obvious. But what about the river without a bridge? What is that? And I find it funny that it's not named anything. So what is that struggle? What is this that's keeping him at the very end from getting into Celestial City? And I guess I like that it's blank in that sense, because now I can fill it in for whatever my final biggest struggle is. Whatever it is that makes me nearly drown in life, that is my river without a bridge. And by the grace of God, the love of God, I swim out into the Celestial City. This book's been translated more than any other book in the world besides the Bible. It's one of the most famous books in Christian history, written by a man in prison. And so when we are on our journey to the Celestial City, there's going to be difficulties, obstacles, people in our way, but you have to do something extraordinary. And by the grace of God, find your way there. So, Paul wrote from prison the story of his life. John Bunyan wrote from prison the story of everyone's life. Because the Christian life is a beautiful journey. And I want you to think of it that way. What is the journey you're going through? What is it that you have done? And how do you fit into God's overall story? So if the Christian life is a beautiful journey, the question is, what is yours? And when you know what your story is, what God's done for you, and how you traveled along, above all, please tell it to someone. Because when you can combine your story and God's story and how it all fits together, then you have more influence on others in the world as you tell them what God has done both in the world and in your life. So what is your story and how do you tell it? What is the journey you've walked along? Did you visit Doubting Castle? Did you spend the night in the town of Vanity? Or have you struggled with other things? Have you ended up in the land of addiction? Have you taken on the potion of bitterness? Have you struggled with depression or pride or something of that nature? Where have you landed? And how did you get to where you are? In 1 Peter, there's another great verse along these lines. 1 Peter says it perhaps better than anyone. He says this, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. So in other words, we need to know our story and where we belong and how it fits in. And we need to be ready to tell it in both a brief way and in a longer way. To those who ask, to those who want to know, why are you the way you are? Why do you live like that? Why do you get up early on Sunday and go to a church where it's boring? I'm joking. This is not boring. This is a great church. Why do you do that? Well, let me tell you why. Here's where I was and here's where I am. Let me tell you my story. This is my journey. This is the path that I have traveled on my way to God. And here's where I've been and here's where I am. So once you know your story, tell your story. Because when you really know God's story, now He's been reaching out to all mankind, and then your life and how you fit into that of reaching out to others, when you know that, then you will be prepared to do great things. Your life will be properly oriented to history and God's plan. Then one day you will have a crown of righteousness in store for you to receive. And one day you will be welcomed with open arms into that celestial city. Because you lined your life up with what God was doing. And you found your journey inside of God's. That is the story as we near the end. Where I fit in and where I live. My story? I was a strange little kid with a bald haircut and a rat tail. I was intense in my young life. I was the kind of kid who, I had to have a 100 on every test I ever took. And if I didn't, I would just beat myself up. There was an intensity to my life. I was put in every activity there ever was, sports-wise and otherwise. And I did them late at night and all weekend. And I was harsh to myself. I was mean. I pushed it to the end. And it hurt me a lot over the years. By the time I got into college, that intensity hurt me. Because in the struggle of trying to figure out my life's path and what I wanted to do for a major or a job or a career or who I might meet or where I might go, that intensity, the hours on work hurts me. And I found myself in a very difficult place. I found myself unable to cope, beating myself up day after day, unable to move on with any peace, because I was so intense about everything I did. In fact, I reached a very low point where I was no longer taking care of myself. And I had to talk to people who could help me through that. And then, when I realized the grace of God, when I restored my hope that God could use me, when I found that there was a plan for me, that changed. And I got back that drive. And that very intensity that had destroyed me in college, God turned to a strength when I found my way to the church. Because that intensity that helped me take seriously what I had to do, but also find the joy and peace in it. That was God-given. It was literally a weakness turned to strength. And now, if God should be so gracious, me, that kid with the bald haircut and a rat tail, who cried every time I didn't make a 100, has a chance, by the grace of God, if any should listen, to continue his story and be a blessing to those who come in contact with me. That's my story. What's yours? Father God, we have nothing without you. And we are so grateful for the gift that we have. And God, as we've taken 30 weeks to go through the story and realize what you've been doing with mankind, God, I pray, Lord, that we will realize how we fit into that. The progress that you are making in reaching out to human beings is continued in us and in the church. And the people we reach out to should hear our story. And Lord, I said in there, interestingly enough, with gentleness and respect. Because the truth is, we go at them strictly with your story only. That might be so direct, it might turn them off. But when we tell our story, it's inherently more gentle. Because we're telling them what we've experienced. And then when they realize what you've done for us, how much more can we tell them what you've done for them? So God, let us continue your story. Let us look back on our picture album of our life and realize the path that we have gone. And let us be able to tell that in strong words so that people can know what you have done in our lives and be grateful. Lord, let's be grateful for what you've done. So God, today, let us go out and tell our story as it fits into yours, to your glory, so that your path can continue in this world. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. If your story needs to continue today, if you need prayer or someone to talk to or a decision to make, this is the invitation song. So it's a very appropriate time to be able to come down. I'll be here. You can talk to me or several other people will be here.